As promised in an earlier post, I decided to do a summary of Victor Hugo's chapter on architecture, This Will Kill That. Essentially, the chapter is a precursor to Marshall McLuhan's concept of the medium as the message, albeit pertaining only to the examples of the printing press and architecture. In essence, it is a brilliant case study. Furthermore, despite its length and opulent language, its meaning is quite diagrammatic, and it is in this manner I wish to deconstruct it. Hugo is quite explicit when he states that This Will Kill That has two faces, both of which derive from the variations of the statement, the printing press will kill the church. One derivation, the one that I am introducing first, although Hugo introduces secondly, is that the printing press as a device will kill the church as a piece of architecture. Here Hugo describes architecture's role as the main reservoir of human thought before the printing press was invented. Architecture was the great handwriting of the human race, and the great book of humanity. If there was an idea that was so great it needed to perpetuate itself, it would have done so through architecture. Hugo cites examples in Gothic, Romanesque, Greek, Egyptian, and Hindu architecture whose materiality was imbued with meaning from a mixture of tectonics and art, which included sculpture, carving, painting, mosaics, and stained glass windows. But with the invention of the printing press came a system of communication that was far superior to architecture. The printing press allowed content to be quick, cheap, repeatable, ubiquitous, resistant, and have an endless vocabulary. The medium of architecture has none of these qualities. Regarding the qualities of its quick, cheap, and repeatable means of production, the printing press is a far simpler process of creating content. On this matter, Hugo wrote, "When one compares thought forced in order to transform itself into an edifice, to put in motion 4 or 5 other arts and tons of gold, a whole mountain of stone, a whole forest of timber work, a whole nation of workmen, when one compares it to the thought which becomes a book, for which a little paper, a little ink, and a pen suffice, how can one be surprised that human intelligence should have quitted architecture for printing?" Added to this the fact that architecture requires great amount of power to construct, what it expresses as a communicative medium will always be tied to issues of power. Regarding the qualities of its ubiquity and resistance, the printing press is a mass-produced item that can spread entire reaches of the globe, whereas architecture is a one-off, anchored in space. On this matter, Hugo writes, "In its printed form, thought is more imperishable than ever. It is volatile, irresistible, indestructible. It mingles with the air." In the days of architecture, it made a mountain of itself and took powerful possession of a century and a place. Now it converts itself into a flock of bird, scatters itself to the 4 winds, and occupies all points of air and space at once. One can demolish a mass, but can one extirpate ubiquity? Regarding the qualities of its vocabulary, the printing press is literal, whereas architecture's meaning is elusive. On this matter, Hugo writes, "Architecture are dark books, which the initiated alone understand how to decipher," which depicts the locked-up nature of meaning in a medieval hierarchical society. Then, when confronted with the articulateness and egalitarianism of the Enlightenment, architecture could not reproduce this new state of human thought. In all counts, architecture had been dethroned as the prime means of communication and meaning in society. A consequence of this fact is that less creative effort was put into architecture in order to communicate. Hugo describes this condition in a brutal declaration of architecture's inabilities. Architecture grows dim, loses its colour, becomes more and more effaced. The printed word, the gnawing worm of the edifice, sucks and devours it. It becomes bare, denuded of its foliage, and grows visibly emaciated. It is petty, it is poor, it is nothing. It no longer expresses anything, not even the memory of the art of another time. Reduced to itself, abandoned by the other arts, because human thought is abandoning it. It summons bunglers in the place of artists. Glass replaces the painted windows. The stone cutter succeeds the sculptor. Farewell all sap, all originality, all life, all intelligence. As if it is required, there is a crescendo to end on. He offers the following one-liner. Let the reader make no mistake, architecture is dead, irretrievably slain by the printed book. These portions of the chapter are concerned with the lessons of media, that is, how one means of communication supersedes another. As such, we end the first aspects of Hugo's lecture. In some respects, it might prove the most important portion for use in further discussions about media and architecture. But we could not end here without describing the second feature of the chapter. The other derivation, the one I obviously make second, although Hugo introduces first, is that the press as a social practice will kill the church as a hierarchical social structure. It is because of the nature of the way architecture's content must be produced, distributed and consumed versus that of the printed book, which determines what type of discourse and society that will develop. Drawing upon the insight that architecture requires power to construct it, it is therefore reasonable to expect that what it does communicate will try to reinforce this structure of power. Not only do Romanesque, Gothic or Baroque architecture retell the stories of Christianity, but it expresses its moral code and hierarchy of institution that created it. Furthermore, the perception of this message was strengthened by the means of congregation. The privileged one spoke to the many. The printed book, on the other hand, allowed more to write and more to read. Greater authorship challenged a singular authority. The printing press, due to the inherent qualities of the medium, became the art of discourse, discussion, and debate, whereas architecture was the art of decree. As such, the social discourse turned away, although through a process of generations, from mysticism to rationality, or as Hugo puts it, intelligence sapping faith. This, in turn, changed social organisation from theocracy to democracy. On this matter, Hugo writes, before the invention of printing, reform would have been a mere schism. Printing converted it to a revolution. Surely the Catholic Church had been challenged by heretics in the past, but without the aid of the printing press, such instances were mere nuisances. However, the Protestants, with the aid of the printing press, were able to instigate the Reformation, which severed the authority of Rome away from nearly half of its former jurisdiction. This connection is made even more direct when Hugo follows it with, Gutenberg is the precursor of Luther. Placing Gutenberg and Luther into the context Hugo intended for them, we begin to build a diagram of Hugo's lessons by documenting what came before them and after them. Gutenberg was the catalyst that changed the prime means of communication from architecture to the book, whilst Luther challenged the hierarchy of the Catholic Church and, despite not being his intention, for he was a man of faith after all, inadvertently began a process that would challenge all forms of mysticism. Thus we get two parallel streams of events that follow the same timeline. Removing the people who made this history, in order to diagram the starting and end points, we can see that on the left, the book killing architecture, and on the right, rationality killing mysticism. Thus we recapture Hugo's two faces of the phrase, this will kill that. But Hugo also links these two lessons, stating how the means of communication has an effect on society. Architecture was the art of faith, the printed book was the art of reason. After rewording this to another equivalent, we come on to Marshall McLuhan's statement, the medium is the message. After having gone through the detail of Victor Hugo's chapter, This Will Kill That, we can see how it is concerned with the exact same elements McLuhan was discussing more than a century afterwards. When viewed as a total message, this McLuhanist insight is just an interesting case study for a student of media theory to casually reflect upon as one of the many developments they would have to become familiar with. But for the discipline of architecture, this message is not just interesting, but raises some fundamental questions about architecture's ability as an art form. What is architecture's value as a communicative art in a post-Gutenberg world? And is this compounded with the inventions of telephony, television, and the internet? It is on these questions that I finish this interpretation of Victor Hugo's work. I hope it was useful. Thank you for listening.